Thank you for listening to the Lending Thoughts podcast, sponsored by Rocket Pro. Today, I'm lucky to have Ivy Budisavljevic from Sagen and Mortgage Professionals Canada here with me. We're going to be diving into a conversation about her role in Sagen, the role that Sagen plays in the mortgage industry. And it's really, really important to understand what it is insurers do. So you're not going to want to miss that. The other part of what Sagen does is make sure that all these new changes are implemented, and we got a bunch of those changes in 2024 and early 2025 that will help mortgage brokers run a better business. You won't want to miss that. And then on the other side, the Mortgage Professionals Canada and the advocacy that group does to help push this industry forward. There's some really cool conversations around that. So listen in today. You're going to want to hear from Ivy. Thank you so much. All right, Ivy, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Bekim. I'm so excited to be here with you.
Absolutely. I love our friendship and partnership that we have. So excited to have this conversation. I know a little bit about you, but I would love for folks to know more about you. So can you tell us your life story in 60 seconds or less, please?
Absolutely. So I'm a millennial outlier in that I have worked for one company for 15 years. I started at Sagen as a summer student, a summer intern in May of 2010. And I look back at that time, Bekim, and I'm just forever grateful for the knowledge transfer and the mentorship from so many industry veterans who gave me that time back in that summer of 2010 to really teach me this industry. And that's really shaped a lot about how I approach my work today and who I am as a professional. Right now, I lead the head office executive level relationships with a portfolio of Sagen's approved lenders, Rocket Mortgage being one of them. And my mandate at a very broad level is to drive our market share forward and really keep Sagen's market share position in number one. In addition to Sagen, in some of my spare time, I also serve on the Mortgage Professionals Canada Board of Directors. And that association, the mandate is really to help unify all key parties who assist in the home purchase transaction for a home buyer, unify them, gather them together, advocate for what needs to happen in the industry, and make sure that there's a central voice for all of those key players and stakeholders to be educated and to help support that ultimate home buying experience for that customer. Who I am as a person, I think I'm fast-paced and assertive like any good salesperson is, but I also see myself as being very, very empathetic, very, very people-focused. And that ability to collaborate and see other people's point of view is really how I've helped shape my sales strategy and how I approach my relationships with my customers. So that's me in a nutshell.
There's a lot there. I want to go back even further though. So where'd you grow up? What shaped the Ivy that exists today? And for everyone at home, you've done this for me a few times, pronounce your last name, because there's got to be people in this industry that know you that have hidden from saying your last name all these years.
I like that I'm Ivy because there's not very many Ivies. So it's almost like the share of the mortgage industry. You can just call me Ivy. But phonetically, it's Budisavljevic. So Ivy Budisavljevic. We'll quiz you at the end, Bekim.
Yes.
It's lots of consonants crammed together. Absolutely. It's tough. But you know what? For anybody who's just not sure, Ivy is just fine.
Well, that's perfect, because then you could just tell I'm just Ivy, and
that's right.
That works.
It's like your name too, Bekim, right? That's why we get along so well.
That's right. I'm the only Bekim in the mortgage industry in Canada, I think. Someone's going to prove me wrong on that, but yeah. So take us back. Tell us about childhood. What shaped the Ivy that we know now?
Yeah, so I'm a millennial. I'm an oldest daughter. I have a younger sister, and I'm a Leo. So if we put those things together, you have a very protective older sister in me, absolutely. Very fierce and passionate about what I do. Oldest children, I think, you were wanting to prove that you were doing all the right things and setting a good examples for your young siblings. So I think that really shaped who I am as a person. I always had really, really good examples growing up. I'm very close with my family, very close with my mom and dad, and they set amazing examples for me just from even a work ethic perspective, right? Both of them, they met when they were very young. They've always worked extremely, extremely hard for everything that they have. And, my sister and I were really, really lucky to grow up here in Oakville and have a really, really tight family relationship where family is always number one. And as passionate and excited as we are about our careers, I think, we always have to remember that, you have to prioritize that time with family. And whether that's, whether you're married or you're not, you have kids or you don't, whoever is close to you, I think that's how I shape my approach, Bekim. And that's really who I am as a person. If someone asks me, what are your values? Family always, and then, work ethic, right? Be passionate, be excited, and don't be afraid to get your hands dirty and ask questions and learn and put yourself out there to be a better person.
Love that. Totally makes sense. You got big sister vibes. Just getting to know you now. It's adding up for me. So why sales? You said you started at Sagen as an intern, and now you're leading executive accounts. Sagen does a lot of different things along the mortgage spectrum and in the insurance space. So how did you land yourself in sales? Is it a mentor relationship who brought you up? And what's that journey been like for you?
Mm-hmm. Well, I started in underwriting, funny enough. So that's where I got my roots with the business. And thank goodness I started there, because really understanding, how does our business make money? That transactional piece of the role was something that I knew nothing about. And that's really ground level of our business. And to me, that was where I got my first exposure to our customers, and our customers being lenders across Canada. I worked in our call center, right? So we were taking inbound calls from lenders, mortgage brokers, professionals all across Canada. And this was 2010. So, volumes and regulations were night and day to where they are today. So those were consistently crazy busy days where it was spring market every day. And that's really where I got the first taste of, I love what I'm doing in underwriting, but this client interaction, this customer interaction, that's what gets me fired up. That's what gets me excited. And I didn't know what that would look like at Sagen either, or in any other organization. I just, as you grow and evolve as a professional, you get a better understanding of what fills your bucket. And for me, it was that customer interaction. So did underwriting, for about 5 or 6 years within our underwriting department. And then an opportunity came up to join our regional sales team. So to look after all of our lender accounts in the GTA North. So downtown Toronto, kind of up all the way to King City. And I remember being really nervous to apply for that job. I remember having a little bit of do I know what I'm doing? Can I make this change? I'm kind of comfortable doing what I'm doing right now. But I remember talking to a few, mentors within our business and also mentors outside of our business that, the train's passing by and you got to hop on. You got to try something new. And you already know that this is something that's making you happy, is this client engagement, right? So go for it, right? I was young, there was no reason for me not to do it. So Bekim, I do remember that day, submitting my application for that account manager role. And I really look at that as kind of where it all started for me, from sales.
So you hovered over the submit button for a little while, despite the fact you knew it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. But those are the leaps you have to take, right? We all have those moments that we remember. And thank God I did it, really. I mean, I don't know what I would be doing today if I hadn't submitted that job application.
Yeah, what a great story. So for those who maybe aren't too familiar, or for those who want further clarification, what role does Sagen play in the mortgage industry? And maybe to ask it simply, who is Sagen and what does Sagen do?
Great question. So glad you asked. So we are a default mortgage insurer. So Sagen is part of the home buying process in collaboration with the lender. So really, in a nutshell, what happens is if you have a customer, they're purchasing a home and they're putting less than a 20% down payment on that home, the government of Canada requires that loan to have default mortgage insurance. And really what that does is our form of insurance protects the lender in any instance of default, mortgage default. So for whatever reason, the borrower can't pay their mortgage, the bank or the financial institution, the lender, they will be protected against the default on that loan. So really where we fall into the process, Bekim, is, lenders will originate a deal, an application, and once it's approved at the lender, then if it's a less than a 20% down payment, they'll know they'll need to submit it over to Sagen for us to approve from an insurance perspective. So we kind of fall into the process right after lender approval, prior to funding.
Gotcha. So if I'm a mortgage broker, how do I, think about like the fit in of Sagen? Is this something that I need to think about often? Do I, as a mortgage broker, work with Sagen, or is that something that only the lender is going to work on with?
So mortgage brokers are definitely an important piece of how we manage our business. I would say from a file submission standpoint, the submissions are coming directly from the lender. Mm-hmm. But from a business networking, business development, industry partner perspective, we're supporting mortgage brokers out in the field every single day. Examples of that are, providing things like training and education, Bekim, something that I think mortgage brokers can always benefit from. If we partner with a lender who wants to host a training day with a room full of mortgage brokers, Sagen will often be in that room and be a part of that conversation to, number one, educate on who we are and where we fall in that home buying process, but also to provide a different perspective on the first-time home buyer. What we know about the first-time home buyer is extremely advanced. We have 30 years of data on first-time home buyers in Canada. So from how we support mortgage brokers, it's really in that training and education piece as opposed to that transactional kind of file-to-file piece.
For sure. So if Sagen didn't exist, what would change in the market? Or if mortgage insurers didn't exist, what would change in the market, to be more specific? Because I feel like I've had this conversation many times over the years when they'll see it as a cost, right? Like borrowers especially, this is a cost. And I'm saying like, well, if it weren't for this cost, you could not buy a home. There was a time in which if you didn't have X percentage of down payment or these providers were non-existent, you couldn't buy a home, or you would have gotten an absolutely absurd interest rate in order to buy a property like this. So I don't want to steal your thunder here, but if it weren't for the mortgage insurers, like what would the world look like?
Oh gosh. Well, you know what? I think about the home buyer always because they're so impacted by all of the regulations and framework within our industry Bekim. Ultimately getting into the market sooner is what all first-time home buyers are motivated by. And that's really where the mortgage insurers come into play. That ability to have a lower down payment gets you into the market sooner. And, most markets across Canada are experiencing a very high rate of home price appreciation, right? So the longer you wait, if you had to be forced to save a 20% down payment, that could potentially negatively impact, where you want to buy and what you want to buy. And I think you touched on a really good point too, and that's the interest rate, right? Insured mortgages typically have a preferred lower interest rate as opposed to an uninsured loan. So there's definitely, gains to be had from that perspective for the first-time home buyer. I think about, the generation who's thinking about homeownership now. Millennials are tapped out at homeownership. I think, homeownership rates across Canada are about 60%, and millennials are there. But I think about the up and coming generation, your kids Bekim, right? They'll need to get into the market as well at some point too. So it's those types of things that we have to think about, is that homeownership is so ingrained in the Canadian way of life, and it's a fabric of who we are. We have one of the highest homeownership rates in the world. So Canadians want to get into homes as soon as they can. And ultimately, that's really where mortgage insurers, give that opportunity to home buyers.
Yeah, that's well said. So when you think about the way that you guys fit into this, I'm reflecting on some of the changes in 2024. There was a whole bunch of stuff that came down the pipeline. It usually hit the insurers first, and the insurers work with the lenders, and the lenders go and administer those products out to brokers. Maybe just as a bit of a recap, and I know it already seems like a distant memory, but what were some of those changes that took place in 2024, and how did Sagen and the mortgage insurance industry fit into that, such that we can then go out and we can spur homeownership for clients?
Big changes from a regulatory perspective for sure. So when we talk about mortgage amortization for an insured mortgage, it increased from a maximum of 25 years to 30 years. And that's a big deal when it comes to a first-time home buyer who's looking at qualifying for the most mortgage that they can. That extra 5 years, it really was a step in the right direction to helping them, get into homeownership. We used to be able to do that in our industry. In fact, a couple of years into my tenure at Sagen, I remember them kind of that day that it cut back to 25 years. And it almost felt like a step backwards for the home buyer. So really, really positive to see, granted it's, all these years later, that the government realized, 30-year amortization for a first-time home buyer, it just makes sense, right? So that was implemented late last year. Really good to see that momentum from a government relations, regulatory perspective. We have a big change being implemented in that insured refinances are now back in the game and back in the market. So a borrower who owns a home can refinance now up to 90% of that home's value with the funds from the equity takeout to be used to build a secondary suite. So that's a big game changer. Again, we used to offer insured refinances kind of back in the day, if I'll use that phrasing. And it's nice to see that option come back because that's helping to address the housing supply issue, creating more units, and also to help with affordability for folks who, maybe they've always wanted to build that basement suite and they just haven't had the ability to do so. Now you can take out and really utilize the equity in your home to give yourself that opportunity for a little bit of extra income every month to help qualify your mortgage. So those are two big ones, Bekim. The government moves slowly when it comes to changing mortgage regulations. And it was really, really good to have a win late last year, early this year on those two topics specifically.
Yeah, it was interesting because the government moved so slowly, but for a short period of time, it felt like these things were coming swiftly and not a lot of people were in the know that they would be coming, and the expectation was that they would be implemented rather quickly. So you go from a very status quo mindset, thinking that, hey, here's sort of like some of the top things that we would want to see. And now they all happen very quickly in short succession with seemingly not too many conversations with, a lot of people in the industry in advance. I remember our teams having conversations like, when is this happening? What does it mean? And you guys were like, we're just hearing this news too, but we're all over it. We're going to spur into action. We'll find a way because, it's like, then you're in the spot. You got to update your underwriting systems and software, and you've got to change a bunch of policies and procedures and underwriting standards. And then that's got to cascade down through the lenders. And then the lenders have to bring that to the brokers who bring it to the market. Ultimately, it is a really interesting sort of dynamic, and 2024 wasn't without events, and 2025 right out of the gate, here we go, more changes. And given what's going on in some of the political world right now, there could be even more coming. So just telling you, don't get comfortable, pretty much.
Absolutely. But that's the best thing about our industry, right? I mean, every day is different. It keeps us on our toes and it keeps us fresh and relevant. And I think, if anything that's a net new opportunity for, a mortgage broker or mortgage lender to capture business from a new client, there's a lot to be excited about on that front for sure.
Yeah, agreed. So you'd mentioned the board of Mortgage Professionals Canada as well. And I want to talk to you about that because some of those changes that happened and some of the things that our mortgage broker community and lending community is asking for today, a lot of that comes through the voices of people like Mortgage Professionals Canada and the work that you do there. So can you explain a little bit more about what it means to be on the board of Mortgage Professionals Canada, and what are some of the things that you guys are working on right now for 2025 and beyond?
Absolutely. It's a well-timed question, Bekim, because we were reflecting as a board about all of these advocacy wins when it comes to the amortization, the insured refinancing as an example. And so what's next, right? We've been advocating for those changes for a decade. So, we have Ottawa's ear. They are very, very generous with their time when it comes to hearing from MPC about, what needs to happen to drive positive change for Canadians in this industry. So we're strategizing in the next few weeks about, really honing in on what are our top choices for advocacy, kind of looking forward into the future. And how that's done and how it relates back to, what we do as a board is, consulting with the industry. And I think you kind of mentioned that when we were talking about the government changes, become just how important, that consulting piece is when it comes to, number one, prioritizing what changes we think should be made for the industry, but also how those changes should be rolled out and what's the impact and who needs to be involved. So that's a really big piece of what MPC does is, bringing the right people together. Communication with all of those key industry stakeholders is something that we prioritize. We have regional, what we call advisory councils, who meet quarterly to talk about, what is happening in your markets? What do we need to change? What's working? What's not? And then ultimately we bring that feedback, to our quarterly board meetings to, see where we can really drive some change. So I would describe it as a very communicative, very collaborative, and very consultative board. that ultimately is just focused on all key stakeholders, right? So lenders, brokers, realtors, homeowners, anyone who's involved in the process, we're interested in hearing their views and their opinions about what can be better.
Yeah. So if I'm a mortgage broker or part of a mortgage lender and I want my voice to be heard, how do I do that? I think people who are boots on the ground are best to tell us what they're feeling, seeing, hearing from consumers. I really do think consumer behavior and consumer sentiment in many ways should be a big driver of it. It shouldn't be the only driver, because there's the other part, which is also, protecting the taxpayer, protecting the lender, protecting the insurer, protecting government and stability for the overall housing market. But how can we hear from people in the industry? How can they make sure that their voice is heard as a part of this process?
Reach out to your board members. I mean, that's number one. We want to hear from the industry. So that's where we have some opportunity, right? I mean, MPC is out present at industry events. MPC hosts their own regional symposiums where we invite mortgage lenders, mortgage brokers to come spend some time with us, have an education day. So I think attending those events is number one if you're a broker who really wants to have the ear of somebody from MPC, but also just call us, right? I mean, I think that's the spirit of the board is, what's on your mind and what can we help clarify for you and what can we help drive forward for you? It's a big industry, not everybody can, get the ear of, everybody they want to at a big event, like say the MPC National Conference, but, come to those regional events, come to the online webinars, or just pick up the phone and call us. And I have every confidence that the board members who I work with would give that same sentiment, is that, we really want to hear from the industry.
Yeah, there's something to be said for having a unified voice, right? Because not everyone's going to, knock down doors in Ottawa to be heard.
That's right.
But if we can there's tens of thousands of us out there in this industry across the country, here in Canada, if we can centralize some of the asks, I think that would be helpful. Because really what we're trying to do, and the reason why some of these changes are coming down, as I think about it, housing is one of the major things that we're trying to solve for as a country right now. It may be the most important thing alongside productivity that we are trying to solve for as a country right now. And people are thinking about this generationally. As soon as I go to anywhere, family related event, etc., and I start talking to people about what I do, it's like, oh, will my kids be able to buy a home? Will their kids be able to buy a home? Or will I ever be able to buy a home? People don't understand all the push and pull of our industry and everything that goes in. All they know is that it keeps getting more expensive. So they may not have, the exact solution in mind, but they know that housing in our country has become such a really hot button issue. And I think for too long, it got pushed to the side. And I do think that, if we can collect our voices and get the right people around the table who are action oriented and actually acting on that, that's the other half of this equation, is actually doing something about it. And I won't be on a soapbox here, but I do feel like for too long, we knew that there were some underlying problems. They just got left to the side. And I'm happy to see that some changes are being made. And I'm happy to see that some of those are a direct result of voices getting around a table to let you guys know at MPC and other places what needs to be said, what things need to change, and then actually going out and doing something about it. So kudos to you and the work you're doing. So if I'm a mortgage broker, Ivy, and I'm thinking about some of these new policy changes and how to take advantage and how to implement them into my business, are there any things that you're thinking about or seeing people successfully implement with their own end consumer, the customer?
I mean, I think about that end consumer and really the knowledge gap. I think that our industry does a really good job in, providing the resources for training and education, but how it filters down to the consumer, I think we have some opportunity there. And a story to share on that is I was on a plane late last year and this gentleman sat beside me and we were talking, and he was attending a professional conference outside of our industry. And when he found out that I was in the mortgage industry, similar to how you said your friends and family kind of have that immediate question to you, Bekim, when we started talking about him and, he was in a variable rate mortgage, and this was a very professional, successful individual who really had a limited knowledge of the mortgage that he himself held, who his mortgage was even with. I don't even think he could answer that question. When it was up for renewal, his monthly payments, there was a big gap there in terms of, what he knew about the process and about his own mortgage product that he held. So, I mean, that was surprising to me, but it just kind of reaffirms the work that we need to do as mortgage professionals to make sure that, in this complex world of Canadian mortgages, is the end consumer completely comfortable and knowledgeable on the choices that are being presented to them. Mortgage brokers do an excellent job in, helping the end consumer get into the right mortgage. But how do we stay connected with them during the life of that mortgage, right? This gentleman was coming up for renewal. He goes, I know it's soon, but I don't really know when, and I don't know how, and who do I call? And, should I just go to my branch and talk to somebody there? So the guidance throughout the life of that mortgage, I think, is really what we need to hone in on when it comes to, really just number one, embracing that customer relationship that you have, but also making sure that that consumer doesn't feel lost in these changes. We've sat and talked about regulatory changes, Bekim, and we're in the industry, and it can be complicated, but imagine what it sounds like for somebody who's an end consumer.
Yeah. I mean, you talked about two of the changes, which is one, just extending to 30-year amortizations, and, two, rental suite and going up to 90% loan to value. What an awesome opportunity to just reconnect with every single client you've done a mortgage for in the past, to just say, hey, it's been 3 years since we did your last mortgage. I just want to see how things are going. And maybe it gets uncovered through that conversation that the payment's tight month to month right now because the cost of goods on everything have gone up and interest rates everywhere have gone up, not just in mortgage. And it gives you an opportunity to say, okay, well, we put you in a 25-year amortization. You've got 22 years left on that. And look, I don't want you to pay significantly more interest over the life of your mortgage, but I do want you to pay less interest and have more free cash flow month to month. We may want to consider actually looking at this 30-year amortization so that you can afford it. Once you get a few things cleared up, we'll get you back to paying extra on the mortgage, get it paid down as fast as you were planning to anyways. But let's talk about that. Or maybe I was looking at your property. You've got some pretty good square footage there. And I know you said, your kids have grown up now. Are they moving out? Oh, no, they can't afford their own place. Well, what if we did a rental suite? Have you ever thought about that? And
right.
Boom, a whole new conversation, whole new mortgage product. And you're serving your borrowers. You're serving the end consumer, and you're teaching them through that, right? You're not going to call everybody and tell them here's all the new mortgage changes.
Right.
Sometimes we do that as mortgage folks. We create one tile on our social media and we post it. We're new changes up to 90% loan to value, and the phone doesn't ring. Not surprisingly, right? You actually have to get down to the individual situation and say, how are you doing? How is life? How does your mortgage suit you? Is it still the right suit for you in this current stature, or has things changed in your life over 3, 5, 10 years?
Yeah.
It is not something that you can set and forget. So that is really great advice, truthfully, for mortgage brokers, and a great opportunity to touch base with all these changes. And I'm sure there's more to come. I'm confident there are more to come here that will spur new conversations with our consumers. So you've been at Sagen 15 years. You're passionate about this industry. I know that. I mean, you give up your own spare time that you're now with friends and family to also serve this industry on the board of MPC. What are you hoping your impact is on this industry, and what gets you excited to get out of bed every day and get after it still?
Obviously, the mentorship piece has been really, really critical. My upbringing in this industry, like I said, I entered as a summer student, an intern. I was given an opportunity to learn an industry that I knew nothing about. And I will never forget the folks who were generous with their time with me in answering questions and really giving me that space to learn without any judgment, and with follow-up, to check in on how I was doing and, give me that time to really ensure that I was learning what I needed to learn. So that's really shaped who I am today, how I approach my work today, and what I hope for the future is, continuing to be advocates for summer students, summer interns, folks who are new to industry looking for a change, because, you can teach technical skills all day long. If you find somebody with passion and with drive and with work ethic who wants to be committed to learning something new, then I think they can do really, really great things. So that's how I will always approach, the hiring or support of anybody in this industry. And you also never know where someone's going to end up. Right. I mean, in my day-to-day with my sales strategy today, Bekim, I try to get to know everybody. in the organization. Technically I own executive level relationships, but I think it's equally important to get to know everybody at all levels, because you never know what kind of support you can provide to them, but you also never know who's going to be, a director or a VP or the next SVP or CEO. And if people stick around a business as long as I have with Sagen, those types of new opportunities present themselves. So when I look forward, I think that's what my vision is. That's how I want to approach, whatever type of leadership role I'm in, giving time, giving space, and giving those opportunities.
That would be a great impact. And I'm going to actually give you a story to attest to something that you just said, which is like, get to know everybody inside of the organization and foster those relationships. Because I think it's great advice, not just for sales, but in life. Last time you came to town, I think it was the last time, you and I were having lunch that day. We were going to go for lunch. And I had messaged a colleague of mine and I said, hey, I'm going to go for lunch with Ivy. If you want to join, feel free. And he's like, it's cool. I already went for breakfast with Ivy. I was like, oh, okay. So you went for breakfast with Ivy. Isn't she really good at what she does to build that relationship and to know to do that? And then I'm at lunch with you and I said, hey, you should take some time to really get to know Tori, because she's working with our mortgage brokers and all this other stuff. And you're like, I had dinner with Tori last night already. And I'm like, oh, of course you did. Right. So I didn't even know, but there you are, you're fostering these relationships all throughout our organization and building relationships that way. And there's just so much to learn from that. You never know who's out there deeply passionate, making an impact. So taking the time for other people and helping them grow and then helping, each other grow is just so important, and giving back that way is so cool. I want to give you one more opportunity just to maybe shout out, because you've repeatedly gone back to the fact that you've had great mentors inside of those walls and you've been there for 15 years. Who are some of those people inside the walls of Sagen, by name, who maybe people don't know, but are real major drivers in this industry that maybe we should think about as some of the people making the biggest impact out there right now?
Well, I got to give a shout out to Jim Spitali, our COO. When he joined our business 10 years ago, he was director of underwriting, and I reported to him when I was an underwriter. So Jim and I have grown up in this business in a really positive way. So I got to give him a shout out. We've kind of, learned the ropes of operations, underwriting, and sales together for sure. I shout out some of our tenured underwriting team. I think about folks who, like you said, our external customers may not know. We've got a gentleman named Andy Posgate, who's our technical underwriting leader, who hired me into this business, helped me learn the ropes. I also think about, Mary and Anita and Jeff, who are some of our tenured underwriters who have been around our business for 25 plus years, which is incredible. And they're the ones who took time. They really took time. And they're still working hard every day, servicing our customers, getting to know our customers and making sure they're providing really the best customer experience. So they are the gold standard for what an underwriter and a professional in our industry should be.
That's really cool. Did not know Jim had an underwriting background. I took him as like a career salesperson. So
there you go.
That's so awesome that you got to do that with him and then follow in that path, because you guys are both amazing. So very cool.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining me, Ivy. It's been a fantastic conversation. I know more about you and hopefully everyone gets to know more about you. But yeah, Mortgage Ivy, the one and only in our industry. Thank you for making such a great impact.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Bekim. It's been a real pleasure. So appreciate the conversation.